Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 974B, and today's date is May 18th, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. and Saudi Arabia on the verge of implementing Plan B. Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. I uploaded an interview with Mike Shedlock, aka Mish. He is from mishtalk.com. You can go over to the X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel. You'll see the video there, or you can come over to the X22report.com site, scroll down a little bit, look over to the right-hand side, you'll see the video there, or you can go to newssentinel.com, same thing, scroll down a little bit, look over to your right-hand side, and you can play the interview right there. Let's get right into the economic collapse financial news. Now, throughout the year of 2015, the FBI was out there and they were using the term war on cops, and they said it was because of the Ferguson effect. And the everyday person was out there, and they were going after police officers. And very interestingly, is that according to the Bureau, according to their own records, it shows that 41 law enforcement officers were killed in the line of duty in 2015. This is a decrease of almost 20%. When compared with 51 officers killed in 2014. So throughout 2015, law enforcement officials, police unions, and even FBI Director James Comey warned of a war on cops. And they were saying this was because of this outgrowth of the Ferguson effect. And they were trying to convince the entire country that people were killing police all over the place. Well, it turns out that this is completely fake. It's not what they say. And actually, if you look at their statistics, we see that there were 1,200 Americans that died in violent encounters with the police last year. So we see something very different from what they were telling us. And again, we see this happen quite a bit where the FBI, these agencies, they come out, they try to push propaganda that the police are being attacked, that the people are coming after them. Well, when you look at what the police were doing, where they were using these new techniques, where they were drawing their weapons, shooting people for no reason. And I remember back in time, police only drew their weapon if a weapon was drawn on them. Otherwise, they didn't do it. Today, it seems like if someone flinches, you're shot. And we can see from these statistics, it does back that up, where the police are killing many more Americans than Americans killing police. So that war on cops is actually fake, phony, and false once again. Now, we understand that the new 2017 National Defense Authorization Act is being pushed through. And what they've done is they stripped out the draft section for women. We know a lot of people were outraged by this. They didn't want women drafted in the armed forces. And we have to go back in time a little bit here because the selective service, which is completely unconstitutional, was imposed on Congress in 1917 to raise conscripts for World War I. And then again in 1940, ahead of World War II, 1948 for the Korean War, and it was brought back by President Carter in 1980 to warn the Soviet Union over the invasion of Afghanistan. And we see right now that this whole thing was completely unconstitutional. And people were very upset about this whole rider in the NDAA of women being drafted. Now everyone's saying, oh, okay, women are not going to be drafted into the armed forces. Well, there's another bill, and it's called Draft Our Daughters Act of 2016. Now, it sounds like parents are like, okay, let's create a bill that's called Draft Our Daughters because it's a good thing to send our children off to war. And like I said, whenever they name a bill, it's always the opposite of what's happening. It sounds good, but it really isn't. I mean, the Affordable Care Act, need I say more? And what they're trying to do is they're trying to force this issue. They want more Americans to be drafted into the armed forces. Why? Because we are moving towards World War III. And they need everyone on board this time. Because remember, last time, the war was fought in Europe. This time, these countries have weapons that can reach the United States. So the United States, the physical land of the United States, will be brought into war. And this is why they're pushing this so hard. Now, out in Brazil, we see that the coup d'etat is orchestrated by the U.S. So we've seen that former Vice President Temer is going to succeed Rousseff, and he's going to head the country. And remember, he's an U.S. Embassy informant for Washington. We also realize that the Senate impeachment leader has suspicious ties with the U.S. Senator Aloysio Nunes, and he's part of Temer's Brazilian Democratic Movement, who led the impeachment in the Senate. He came to Washington for 3 days, just a day afterward, to meet with the U.S. officials. Some of the people that Nunes met with included members of the U.S. Senate and Foreign Relations Committee, which was former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Thomas Shannon, and among others. And what we're seeing right now is that this was completely orchestrated as a coup, orchestrated by the U.S. And they got these corrupt individuals in Brazil to go along with this. Now, very interestingly, the current U.S. Ambassador to Brazil, Liliana Ayalde, she served as the ambassador to Paraguay in the lead up to the 2012 coup against Lugo, who was ousted in a manner similar to Rousseff. The ambassador acted with great force during the coup that happened in Paraguay, and she is in Brazil doing the same exact thing. So when we look at the situation here, we see that yes, this was orchestrated by the United States to have regime change. Now we see in Venezuela, we see Maduro is out there and he declared a state of emergency. We see the same coup occurring there. We see the opposition-controlled Congress is urging the country to defy the state of emergency. And then we have this surveillance plane from the U.S., a Boeing 707E3 Sentry, fly over Venezuela, and the Venezuela military detected the illegal entry of this plane. Now, this plane is used to support communications of armed groups in war zones or to prepare actions to disable electronic equipment of governments or armed forces or the economy. And we can see that this plane has a radar dish known as a rotordome, which revolves slowly, scanning radio frequencies to pick up communications. And it just so happened that it was there while all this is going on in Venezuela, where they're having this economic downturn, where people are rioting, where there's a state of emergency. So you think at this point that the U.S. is monitoring the situation, getting ready to go in and do this regime change. Now, as we know, Victoria Nuland, she is out in Russia meeting with her counterpart, talking about Ukraine. And Victoria Nuland said that Washington will not recognize local elections in eastern Ukraine if they are held outside the parameters of the Minsk Agreement on Ukrainian reconciliation. And she said there needs to be a Ukrainian election that meet Ukrainian standards and meet OSCE standards. Now, of course, this is not part of the Minsk Agreement whatsoever. This is what she is putting out there. And she is saying that there can be no elections at this point in time because it has to meet all the requirements of Ukraine. Now, when you read the Minsk II ceasefire agreement, this is not what it says. Now, of course, what she's doing is she's spinning everything and telling the world that there's going to be no elections here whatsoever. But we're going to have to watch this situation very carefully and see what happens. Now we see Erdogan. He was at the 13th Islamic Summit entitled Unity and Solidarity for Justice and Peace. And this was set up by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and it took place back in April. Now, Turkey yielded some revealing but certainly not unsuspected news. At the summit, which was chaired by Turkish President Erdogan, more signs emerged of a Turkish attempt not only to continue to destabilize Syria, but an attempt to extend the destabilization into Eurasia up to the Russian border and even inside Russian territory itself. Because we can see what's happening. Turkey and Ukraine, they just signed this agreement for the Black Sea. We see Turkey out in Armenia and out in Nagorno-Karabakh trying to push some type of conflict in this area. So we can see what he's trying to do right now. And he's going to continually push because they need a war to get started. I think this is what the U.S. and the rest of the private Western Central Bank countries have done. They have instructed him to be the wild man. They instructed him, listen, get the wars started any way you possibly can. Create chaos, provoke, and push the agenda. We see right now that the U.S. had a meeting with Russia in Vienna, and we're starting to see that John Kerry first flew to Saudi Arabia, then went to the meeting with Lavrov, because they had to talk about what their plan was, what they were going to do next. Now keep that in mind right now, because we have NATO out there, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. He's saying that he's very concerned over the situation along the Syrian-Turkish border. We are concerned because we have seen several attacks on civilians, on refugees in this area. And we can see right now what they're building up to. Turkey has been pushing this idea for a very long time for a safe zone. Kerry called it the zone of interest. NATO is out there saying we need a way to protect these civilians along the border. So we can see what they're pushing right now. They're pushing the idea of this safe zone a little bit at a time. Now, we're getting a study which says, and it was released by the Center for a New American Security, saying that the key point is that there are dangers emanating from the Middle East, including both terrorism and massive flow of refugees, and they're not containable. They must be addressed at the source over many years using a combination of local actors and American power and influence. The report then calls for international effort against the Islamic State to be scaled up substantially, a move that would include sending more U.S. Special Operation Forces to help root out the terror group from Iraq, Syria, and all the other nations. We see what's going on here. We see what they're preparing for. Now, we're getting reports, and I'm seeing them slowly show up in the news feeds. And this is coming out of Israel. And they're trying to reestablish that Assad is using sarin gas. Now, remember, sarin gas was removed from his country. Those who were using sarin gas was the Free Syrian Army, the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, the terrorist groups. Was not Assad. And the report says that Assad, for the first time since 2013, is using sarin-filled bombs on ISIS fighters outside of Damascus. And this is coming from a senior Israeli official. This is pure propaganda. First of all, why would Assad use a deadly gas in Damascus when he's never used it before? When it was the Islamic State, when it was Al-Qaeda. Now, of course, they can't say he's using it on their people, so they have to say that he's using it on the Islamic State, which they're trying to convince everyone is the enemy. And this is pure propaganda right now. They're trying to make it look like he has sarin gas once again. Now, let's go back to when John Kerry met with the finance minister in Saudi Arabia before he went on to Vienna. So, we see that Saudi Arabia is telling Assad he has two choices. Either he is removed from the political process, or he'll be removed by force. So what they're saying is, step down, or we're going to make you step down. Now remember, Russia said, listen, it is up to the people to decide. And the elections were going to be held, I think it was like 18 months from now. We already saw the first elections with the parliament, and they voted for his party. And it was a huge majority of the people looking at this and saying, okay, we want Assad. Assad invited Russia in. Assad is liberating towns and villages. He is a war hero. He's stuck by his people all of these years. Everything the U.S. is telling us is not true. This was all ginned up. This was all propaganda to convince us that he was a dictator, that the people wanted him out. Furthest from the truth. So, the Saudi Arabia foreign minister has says, we believe we should have moved to Plan B a long time ago. If they do not respond to the end treaties of the international community, then we will have to see what else we can do, and it's time to move to Plan B. Now, what is Plan B? Plan B is a ground invasion. Plan B is the coalition forces to invade Syria. We know tomorrow, May 19th, from different reports coming out of Turkey, they're expecting terrorist attacks from the Islamic State all over their country. And they're preparing for this. Now, is this going to happen? No, this is a report. This is coming from Turkey. And we're going to have to wait to see if it does happen. Now, if it does happen, they're going to see how much traction they get. Because they're going to look at the world and say, look what just happened to us. The Islamic State from Syria, hit this town, hit that city, hit this town, killed this many people. It's a disaster. If they can get traction off of this, that northern army that's being put together by the U.S., Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others, they will then invade Syria from the north. If they can't get traction, remember what Erdogan said. He might have to do this on his own. We have to remember, they brought they brought advanced missile systems up to the border. The U.S. supplied it to Turkey. They put it on the borders. It reaches about 90 kilometers. We know Jay Johnson was on the border there, reinforcing it, setting up surveillance. We know that the U.S. is building 2 bases in Syria, bringing in military hardware, troops. We know Germany is in Turkey, building a more advanced air base in Incirlik to bring in more fighter jets. We know there's state of emergencies in Turkey. The families of U.S. soldiers had to leave. State of emergency in Lebanon. And we can see right now the U.S. is preparing with the coalition forces for some type of ground invasion. And we're going to have to wait to see. All the indicators are pointing to this. We're going to have to see what type of traction they get off of this if it does occur tomorrow. Now, if it happens the 20th or 21st, it doesn't really matter. It still happened. They're still going to play it the same exact way. And if they do get traction off this, this is going to start World War III. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.